My name is Elena Whitmore. I'm 29 years old, and the first time my boyfriend blocked me, I told myself it meant nothing. I remember exactly where I was that night, sitting on the edge of my bed, one leg folded under me, my phone glowing in my hand after a long day that had drained me more than I wanted to admit. The room was dim except for the lamp on my nightstand. My shoes were still on the floor where I had kicked them off. A half-full glass of water sat beside me, untouched, while my conversation with Adrian turned cold for reasons that, even now, feel embarrassingly small. At that point, we had been together a little over a year. From the outside, we looked fine. We talked every day. We saw each other often. We had habits that made us look solid to everyone else. Sunday coffee, midweek takeout. Voice notes when one of us was too tired to type. Inside jokes no one else would understand. Casual comments about the future, said like they were already true. Nothing about us looked broken. Nothing looked unstable. Which was probably why I missed the first warning sign. The argument itself was so minor I can barely reconstruct it now. Something about me replying late, or not calling when he expected, or sounding distracted. It was the kind of disagreement that should have lasted 5 minutes, then disappeared. But Adrian was never really interested in ending things cleanly when he felt slighted. "You don't care," he wrote. I frowned at the screen. "I do care." No, you don't." My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. "How do you know that?" His reply came back immediately. "Because if you cared, you'd act differently." That word stayed with me. Differently. I stared at it with a strange tightness in my chest, because it sounded like I had failed some invisible test. He was telling me I was wrong without telling me how. Telling me I was lacking something without naming what it was. Differently how? I asked. He didn't answer directly. He almost never did when a direct answer would expose what he was actually doing. Instead, he wrote, "You'll understand when I'm gone." I read that twice. Then again. My fingers tightened around my phone. What does that mean? A few seconds passed. Then his message came through. "I'm blocking you for a day. Maybe then you'll realize how much I matter." I actually laughed when I saw it. Not because it was funny, because it felt ridiculous. Too dramatic to be real. Too immature to belong in an adult relationship. I thought he was bluffing, trying to scare me into saying something softer, bigger, more apologetic than I actually felt. So I typed, "Adrian, don't do this." The message failed. I tried again. Failed. Blocked. I sat there for a second, then another, still expecting the whole thing to collapse under its own absurdity. I thought he would unblock me in 10 minutes, maybe an hour. I thought he would come back and act like he just wanted to make a point. He didn't. The room felt too quiet after that. I put my phone down on the blanket beside me and tried to behave like none of it mattered. I got up, went to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, stared at leftovers I didn't want, heated something anyway, and turned on a show I barely followed. But even with the television on, my mind kept drifting toward my phone on the coffee table. Screen down, like that might somehow make the silence easier to ignore. It didn't. That was the first thing I learned. Silence has weight when someone uses it on purpose. I kept telling myself it didn't matter. Still, I checked my phone before bed, then again after brushing my teeth. Then once more when I woke in the middle of the night and saw 2:13 glowing on the microwave clock. By morning, I was annoyed with myself for caring, and even more annoyed that something as childish as a block button had managed to make my apartment feel emptier than it was. He unblocked me the next morning like nothing had happened. No apology, no embarrassment, no explanation. Just one message. "Did you miss me?" I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror with wet hair and a towel wrapped around me when it came in. Steam still clung to the glass. My mascara wand paused in my hand. I looked at the words and felt relief before I felt anger, which only made me angrier with myself. I typed, "Of course." His reply came instantly. "Good, see? It works." That should have been the moment I pulled back. I know that now. That should have been the moment I stopped asking what I had done and started asking why the person I loved needed to manufacture absence just to measure my reaction to it. But when you care about someone, you can excuse almost anything if the damage arrives in small enough pieces. He's emotional. He didn't mean it like that. He just wants reassurance. It only happened once. That last lie was the easiest one to believe. So I believed it. I got dressed. I went to work. I answered his messages later like we were normal again. And on the surface, we were. We joked. We sent updates. He was warm and easy and affectionate in that way that makes you question your own discomfort. Makes you wonder whether last night was really as strange as it felt. That was part of the trap. Nothing was ever bad long enough to look unforgivable right away. The second time felt different. It didn't come from some huge blow-up. It started in another ordinary conversation and turned sour the same way the first one had. Except this time, the accusation was less clear. "You're not emotionally present," he wrote. I was on my couch, still in my work blouse, my laptop open and forgotten beside me. "I talk to you every day," I answered. "That's not the same." I stared at that message and felt the first real pull of exhaustion. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "You should want to talk to me more." "I do want to talk to you." "Not the way I want." There it was again, that same impossible standard. The same feeling that I was being judged by rules he refused to explain. No matter what I said, it never seemed to match the version of love he wanted from me. And because I still cared, because I was still trying, I kept responding like one honest conversation could fix it. It couldn't. A few minutes later, he sent the line I had already started to dread. "I'm blocking you again. Think about what you did." And just like that, the conversation ended on his terms. No discussion, no clarity, no resolution. Just the door shut from his side while I was still standing in the middle of the conversation, trying to understand what had happened. This time it lasted 3 days. The first day, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe he just needed time to cool down. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe when he came back, we would actually talk it through. The second day, confusion started turning into irritation. Not because I missed him less, but because I was beginning to see the shape of the pattern. Nothing had been solved. Nothing had been clarified. He had simply left me alone with the discomfort and called that communication. By the third day, I felt tired. Not dramatic, devastated tired. A quieter kind. The kind that settles in your shoulders, in your jaw, in the way you stop checking your phone every 5 minutes because some part of you already knows exactly how this ends. And I was right. On the third night, his message appeared like a line from a script. "Did you miss me?" Same tone, same expectation, same quiet demand underneath it. "Prove it. Prove that I still matter. Prove that I can disappear and come back and still find you exactly where I left you." I looked at the message for a long moment before replying. Then I typed, "I did." He sent back a heart, as if that settled everything, as if the silence had been a lesson and I had passed. Maybe in a way I had, just not the lesson he thought he was teaching. Because after that second time, something in me started changing. Not enough to leave. Not enough to confront him with the clarity I would have later, but enough to notice. Enough to realize I was no longer standing inside a relationship. I was standing inside a rhythm he controlled. A disagreement, a punishment, a return, a demand for reassurance, again and again. What frightened me most was not how cruel it felt. It was how familiar it was becoming. And underneath every excuse I kept making for him, a quieter truth was starting to take shape. This was never really about space. It was about control. After that second time, I started noticing things I had trained myself not to notice before. Not because Adrian changed, because I did. At first, it was subtle, almost embarrassing. The way my stomach tightened when I saw his name after a few hours of silence. The way I reread harmless messages looking for disappointment that might not even be there. The way I hesitated before making plans, wondering whether he would hear busyness as rejection, independence as distance, happiness as disloyalty. It wasn't that we were constantly fighting. That would have been easier to name. It was the uncertainty that wore me down. Most days, Adrian was very good at being the version of himself I wanted to believe in. He was attentive, funny, in that quiet, controlled way that made people lean in. He remembered details. The tea I liked when I couldn't sleep. The movie I always watched when I was sick. The way I hated loud restaurants and fake apologies. Around other people, he looked steady, thoughtful, easy to admire. That was part of why it took me so long. His cruelty never arrived loudly enough to expose itself all at once. It came dressed as sensitivity, as hurt, as a need to feel valued. And every time I questioned it, there was always a softer explanation available if I wanted one badly enough. He's not controlling, he's just sensitive. He's not punishing me, he's overwhelmed. He's not making me earn his presence. He just wants to feel important. That was the problem with those lies. They sounded compassionate. That was why they worked. Over the next few months, the pattern repeated often enough that I stopped being surprised by it, though I never really got used to it. Every incident began a little differently, but they all ended the same way. A disagreement, a shift in tone, a sentence that made me feel like I had misunderstood the rules again. Then silence, then blocking, then his return, easy and casual, as if the whole thing had only happened inside me. One evening, it started because I took too long to answer. I had stayed late at work. By the time I got home, my shoulders ached, my head hurt, and rain was streaking down the windows in silver lines. I kicked off my shoes, plugged in my phone, and saw 3 messages from him waiting. "You disappeared." "I was working," I wrote back. "You could have said that." "I'm saying it now." A pause. Then, "You always make me feel like I'm asking for too much." I stared at the screen, blinking against the headache building behind my eyes. I wanted to ask the obvious question. "What exactly are you asking for? Time, reassurance, access, obedience?" But by then, I already knew questions like that never led to clarity with Adrian. They only widened the fog. So instead, I did what I had started doing too often. I softened. "That's not what I'm doing. It is how it feels." There it was again. That move. The conversation sliding out of facts and into something impossible to disprove. Not what happened. How it felt to him. And once it moved there, I was no longer trying to solve anything. I was managing his interpretation of me. "I'm sorry it felt that way," I wrote carefully. His reply came almost at once. "I think I need space." My chest tightened. By then, that word meant something ugly in our relationship. Space didn't mean breathing room. It didn't mean a pause with mutual respect. It meant exile, a sentence handed down without discussion. Before I could respond, another message appeared. "Don't text me." Then the messages failed. Blocked. I sat in the half-dark living room with the rain tapping the glass and my reflection barely visible in the window. My bag was still by the door. Dinner hadn't been made. The apartment smelled faintly of wet concrete drifting in from outside. And all I could think was how humiliating it was that a grown woman could feel abandoned by 3 lines of text and a feature on a phone. But I did. That was the part I hated most. Not that he blocked me. That it still worked. The next morning, I woke already tired. Not because I had cried. I hadn't. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead and tried to replay the conversation in a way that made sense. I kept reaching the same dead end. Nothing had actually happened. Not really. I had been at work. He had felt ignored. I had tried to explain. And somehow I was the one shut out again. That was when I started understanding something I still wasn't ready to act on. With Adrian, every conflict ended with me taking responsibility for his reaction to reality. If he felt insecure, I should have prevented it. If he felt unimportant, I should have anticipated it. If he was hurt, I should have spoken differently, faster, warmer, sooner. And if I failed, even unknowingly, I was the one left outside the conversation while he disappeared and called it self-protection. 2 days later, he came back. No apology. Just a message at 8:14 p.m. while I was folding laundry in my bedroom. "Miss me." I stared at it with one of my shirts in my hand and thought for one strange second that it was his. Mine, I realized immediately after. That was how far this had gotten under my skin. Even when he wasn't physically there, he occupied space, the apartment, my routines, my thoughts, the emotional weather of my day. I typed what I always typed in some form. Yes. His answer came with easy warmth, as if he were returning from a work trip instead of a silence he had chosen. Knew it. Then a heart. Then a joke. Then a photo of the coffee he was drinking, like we were fine again. And I played my part. I answered. Matched his tone. Let the conversation slide back into normal, because confronting him after he returned always felt like reopening a wound he would insist had already healed. But nothing healed. It layered. Each silence stacked itself on top of the last one. Each return asked me to erase what had just happened in order to keep the relationship moving. And because I wanted the good version of us more than I wanted the truth, I kept erasing. Until I couldn't. The strangest part was how ordinary life still looked around all of it. I still went to work, still met friends, still bought groceries, answered emails, washed my face at night, laughed at stupid videos, paid bills, watered the plant by the window. On paper, my life looked stable. Inside the relationship, it wasn't. I edited myself before speaking. I measured response times. I softened statements that should have been simple. I turned preferences into requests, requests into apologies, apologies into habit. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. One Saturday afternoon, I was on my way to lunch with a friend when Adrian called. I was in the back seat of a rideshare, the city sliding past in pale sunlight, my lipstick still uncapped in my hand. "Hey," I answered. "You sound busy." "I'm on the way to lunch." A beat of silence. "With who?" I looked out the window. "Maya." "Oh." That tiny sound carried more weight than a full accusation. I capped my lipstick slowly. "What?" "Nothing." Which, of course, meant something. I leaned back into the seat. "Adrian." He exhaled. "I just thought maybe we'd spend today together." "You didn't mention that." I shouldn't have to schedule time with my own girlfriend. There it was again. The tilt. The trapdoor under an ordinary moment. I closed my eyes briefly. I already had plans. So I come second. No, I had plans. You always make it sound so reasonable. That line settled over me like a warning. Because that was another thing he did well. Make my normal boundaries sound like calculated cruelty. Make consistency sound cold. Make independence sound like rejection. Why does this have to become a fight? I asked quietly. It doesn't, he said, too calm. Enjoy lunch. Then he hung up. I stared at the screen, feeling the old dread rise, not because the call itself had been terrible, but because I knew what might come next. The rest of the ride, I kept checking my phone without meaning to. At the restaurant, I smiled through the first 10 minutes of conversation with Maya and barely heard half of what she said. You okay? She asked finally. I looked up, but yeah, just tired. That was easier than explaining. How was I supposed to explain a relationship built on disappearing acts without sounding dramatic? He doesn't scream. He doesn't threaten. He doesn't cheat. He just removes himself whenever I fail an emotional test I didn't know I was taking. Maya tilted her head. You seem somewhere else. I forced a smile. Just work stuff. That was a lie. But it was also the kind of truth tired women tell when they need to get through a meal without falling apart. When I got home that evening, there it was. A message. You clearly need time with other people more than me. I sat on the couch and stared at it, my keys still in my hand. Then another. Don't worry, I won't bother you. Then another. Actually, forget it. And then the thread went dead. Blocked again. This time I didn't move for a while. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic below my building. My purse slid from my shoulder onto the floor. My keys were still pressing crescents into my palm. I wish I could tell you that was the moment I stood up for myself. It wasn't. It was the moment I understood the structure. The block wasn't only a reaction. It was a reward. For him, he got to feel powerful, wanted, chased, central. He got to leave me with discomfort and return later for proof that I had felt it. The missing piece was never communication. It was submission. And once that thought entered my mind, I couldn't fit the relationship back into the softer story I had been telling myself. Still, recognition and action are never the same thing. Recognizing the pattern doesn't mean you leave immediately. Sometimes it just means you suffer more clearly for a while. So when he came back again, I answered again. Because that is how people stay too long. Not because they know nothing is wrong. Because they know something is wrong and are still hoping it can be named without destroying everything. When Adrian returned that time, his message was softer than usual. You there? No miss me, no smugness, no edge. Just enough gentleness to make me doubt my own anger. Yes, I wrote. I've had a lot on my mind. I almost laughed. Because once again, the story had reset in his favor. He disappeared. I suffered. He returned carrying unnamed feelings. And somehow the emotional labor was still mine. What happened? I asked. He didn't answer for several minutes. Then, I just needed to know if you'd notice. I read that once. Then again, and something inside me went still. There it was, said more plainly than he had ever said it before. Not I needed time. Not I was overwhelmed. Not I didn't know how to communicate. I needed to know if you'd notice. He had turned absence into a measuring tool, and me into the thing being measured. I typed and deleted several replies. Then I sent the safest one. I noticed. His reply came immediately. I know. That should have been the moment I left. Instead, I stayed long enough to see the pattern all the way through. Long enough for one final week to change everything. The last time he blocked me didn't begin with some huge betrayal. It began with plans. I told him I was going out with friends. That was it. I was standing in my bedroom, half dressed, one earring in, the other still on the dresser. My phone was propped against a book while Adrian's name lit up the screen. You're going out? He asked. Yes. With who? Just a few friends. A pause. You can cancel. I blinked, thinking I had heard him wrong. What? You can cancel, he repeated, calmer this time. We can spend time together instead. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Suddenly, the outfit I had chosen felt like something I had to defend. I already made plans, I said. So? So I'm going. Another pause, longer this time. You're choosing them over me. The sentence landed exactly the way he intended it to. Heavy, accusing, built to make me retreat from something I had every right to do. No, I said slowly. I'm keeping my plans. That's the same thing. It's not. After that, the conversation started looping. The same points, the same tone, the same shift where logic stopped mattering and only his interpretation remained valid. You don't prioritize me, he said. I do. This is one evening. If I mattered enough, you'd want to be with me. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was again, the test. Not about what I did, but about what I was supposed to feel. I do want to be with you, I said, but I also want to see my friends. Not the way I want. That sentence again, like a line he had perfected through repetition. I sat on the edge of the bed, the second earring still untouched. Adrian, this doesn't have to become something bigger. It's not bigger, he said, his voice suddenly quieter. Too quiet. That was always the warning. I just think you need time to understand what I'm talking about. My stomach tightened. Time? Yes. Silence. Then evenly, almost gently, I'm blocking you for a week. I stared at the screen. A week. Not a night, not a few hours. A full week of silence handed to me like a consequence. For what? I asked. So you can appreciate me. There was no anger in his tone. That was what made it worse. He wasn't reacting. He was deciding. And in that moment, something inside me finally cleared. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just clearly. For the first time since this pattern began, I wasn't confused. I understood exactly what this was. It wasn't miscommunication. It wasn't emotional overwhelm. It wasn't insecurity in the harmless, wounded way I had kept trying to frame it. It was control. Simple as that. I looked at myself in the mirror again. One earring in. One missing. Half ready. Half paused. Waiting. That was the word that came to me. Waiting for his moods. Waiting for his returns. Waiting for permission to feel stable again. And for the first time, I didn't want to wait. So instead of arguing, instead of explaining, instead of shrinking myself into whatever version of enough he wanted this time, I typed something simple. Make it a month. There was a pause. Longer than usual. Then his reply came. Very funny, I'm serious. So am I wrote. Another pause. I could almost feel him recalculating on the other side of the screen. This wasn't what he expected. There was no panic in my answer. No apology. No effort to fix it. Just acceptance. Or something close enough to unsettle him. Don't text me, he said finally. I won't. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then the thread went silent. Blocked. Again. But this time it didn't feel the same. I sat there with my phone still in my hand, waiting for the usual wave to hit. The restlessness. The urge to check. The low anxiety that stretched every minute longer than it should have. It didn't come. Instead, there was quiet. Real quiet. The kind that doesn't demand anything from you. I stood up, put on my other earring, picked up my bag, and left the apartment. Dinner that night tasted better than it should have. Conversation felt easier. I laughed without checking my phone between sentences. When someone asked me something, I answered without dividing my attention in 2. Half there, half elsewhere, waiting. When I got home, I didn't reach for my phone. I took off my shoes, washed my face, changed into something comfortable. Then I sat on the couch and looked around. That was when I noticed it. Not something dramatic, something quieter. How much of the apartment no longer felt like mine. It wasn't that my things were gone. They were still there. But they had been pushed, shifted, adjusted over time to make room for his jacket over the chair, his shoes near the door, his charger in the outlet I used to keep free. Small things, nothing on their own. Together, they had taken over more than I realized. For the first time, I wasn't looking at the apartment as our space. I was looking at it as mine, and asking myself a simple question. If he's not here, why is everything still his? The thought didn't feel angry. It felt practical. I stood up, walked to the closet, opened the door, and just looked. His clothes hung next to mine like they had always belonged there. Shirts I had washed, jackets I had folded, things that had blended so gradually into my life that I had stopped seeing them as choices. I reached out and pulled one hanger forward, then another, and without making some grand declaration to myself, I started separating things. Mine on one side, his on the other. At first it felt temporary, like I was organizing, like I was preparing for him to come back and collect a few things. But as the piles grew and the space between them widened, something changed. This didn't feel temporary. It felt necessary. I folded one of his shirts carefully, put it in a box, then another, then another. No anger, no rush, just steady movement. The first night I only meant to organize. That's what I told myself. I placed his things on one side of the bed, mine on the other. A simple separation, clean, logical, like I was restoring balance to something that had quietly tilted too far. But the next morning, the piles were still there. And something about that felt right. I stood barefoot on the cool floor, looking down at the 2 sides like they belonged to 2 different lives that had overlapped for too long. My side felt familiar, lighter. His side felt heavier than it should have, even though it was just folded fabric and forgotten objects. I picked up the first shirt, folded it, placed it into a box. Then another, and another. No music, no distraction. Just the sound of cardboard opening, tape pulling, fabric moving through my hands. By the second hour, the closet looked different. By the third, it felt like mine again. That was when I understood something I should have seen sooner. His things hadn't just been in my space. They had replaced mine. Not all at once. Gradually. A jacket here, a pair of shoes there. A drawer that quietly became his without discussion. A charger that stayed plugged in until it felt permanent. I hadn't lost space in one dramatic moment. I had given it up in pieces. That realization didn't hurt the way I expected. It clarified. I moved into the living room. Started with the smaller things first. The mug he always used. The book he said he'd finish but never did. The extra toothbrush in the bathroom. Each item went into a box, not thrown away, not handled carelessly, packed. By the end of the first day, there were 3 boxes lined up near the door. The apartment felt quieter. Not empty, not sad, just quieter. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. No checking my phone. No half waking with that familiar instinct to reach for it. Just sleep. The second day, I kept going. Drawers, shelves, corners I hadn't examined properly in months. A watch left behind. Headphones. A hoodie over the back of a chair, like it had been waiting for him to return. I folded that one slower, not because it was harder, because it felt like closing something. By the third day, everything of his was contained. Not erased, not destroyed, just no longer woven into the place I lived. That was when I rented the storage unit. The clerk didn't ask questions. He slid the form across the counter, pointed to where I needed to sign, then handed me a small key attached to a plastic tag. Unit 314, he said. Codes on the receipt. I nodded. Thank you. That was it. No significance. No emotional scene. Just a transaction. On the 4th day, I moved the boxes, one trip at a time, down the stairs, out of the building, into the back of my car. Then to the storage facility, where rows of metal doors lined a quiet hallway that smelled faintly of concrete and dust. I found the unit, unlocked it, rolled the door up. The space inside was small and empty. I carried the first box in, set it down, then the second, then the third, trip after trip. No hesitation. Each box stacked neatly against the wall, like I wasn't getting rid of something, just moving it to where it actually belonged. Separate from me. By the 5th day, there was nothing left of his in the apartment. No clothes, no shoes, no forgotten items tucked into corners. Nothing. I stood in the middle of the living room and turned slowly, taking it in. It didn't feel empty. It felt clear. Like a room after a window has been opened and fresh air has finally moved through it. I sat on the couch and looked at my phone. Still nothing. Of course. He had said a week, and he always followed his own rules. But for the first time, I wasn't counting. I wasn't waiting for the 7th day. I wasn't imagining the message that always came at the end of these silences. By then, I already knew what it would say. On the 6th day, I did ordinary things. Went out for coffee. Took a walk. Came back. Cooked dinner. Watched something without checking my phone every few minutes. Simple things. Normal things. They felt different because nothing was pulling at me underneath them. No invisible thread. No tension waiting to snap back into place. Then, on the 7th day, exactly like before, the message came. Right on time. No apology. No acknowledgement. No awareness of what had changed while he was gone. Just one line. Miss me? I was sitting on the couch when it appeared. Phone in my hand. Room quiet. Late light stretched across the floor in long, pale lines. I looked at the message and felt almost nothing. Not relief. Not anger. Just recognition. I had seen this moment before. Lived it. Played my part in it. Answered the way he expected. Closed the loop so the pattern could begin again. But this time the loop was already broken. I didn't answer right away. I set my phone down beside me, leaned back, and looked around the apartment. At the space that felt entirely mine again. At the quiet that no longer felt like absence. Then I picked up my phone, opened the message, and typed something simple. Unit 314, code 5829. I hit send. 5 seconds later, my phone rang. Adrian. Of course. I looked at the screen before answering. Not to make a point, just noticing how different it felt. His name used to come with a rush, a reflex, a pull I couldn't ignore. Now it was just a call. I answered. Hello? What is that supposed to mean? His voice came fast, sharp, no warmth, no softness, none of the casual confidence he usually returned with. I leaned back against the couch. What part? The message. What is that? That's where your stuff is. Silence. Then. What? A storage unit, I said. Unit 314. Another pause. Longer this time. You're joking. No. You moved my things? Yes. All of it? Yes. I could hear the shift in his breathing. That slight loss of control he usually hid so well. When? He asked. This week. This week? His voice rose. While I wasn't talking to you? Yes. A sharp exhale. You took all my things out of the apartment. Yes. Why would you do that? I let the question sit there for a second. Then I answered evenly. Because you blocked me for a week. That doesn't mean you move my stuff. You said you needed space. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. No, it's not. His voice was climbing now, slipping out of that careful calm he relied on when he wanted control. You're overreacting, he said. That word almost made me smile. Not because it was funny. Because for the first time, it didn't land. No, I said quietly. I'm done adjusting. Silence. A real one this time. Then, softer. You're being serious right now. Yes. You really moved everything. Yes. And you're just okay with this? I looked around the apartment, at the cleared surfaces, the steady quiet, the absence that no longer felt like a loss. Yes. Another pause. You didn't even wait for me. That almost sounded like disbelief. Like I had broken a rule I was never supposed to question. I did, I said. When? For a year. That landed. I heard it in the silence that followed. For once, there was no quick argument ready. No clever twist to bend the conversation back toward his feelings. Just quiet. Then his voice changed. Lower. Less certain. You're really ending this. Yes. Just like that? No. I paused. After everything, he let out a slow breath. But He stopped. Tried again. I didn't think you'd take it this far. That, at least, sounded honest. I know, I said. Another silence. Then, okay, listen. What? I won't do it again. There it was. The promise. The one that always came when he felt the ground shift under him. After the second time. After the third. After the fourth. Always urgent enough to sound sincere. Never lasting long enough to matter. No, I said. Why not? Because this isn't about this time. Then what is it about? It's about every time. I could hear him breathing again. Slower now, thinking, looking for the next line that might still work. You're really not coming back, he said. No. You don't even miss me? That question used to pull something soft out of me. This time it just felt like something I should answer honestly. I thought about it for a second, then said, I miss who I thought you were. That was the shift. After that, he stopped arguing. No more pushing. No more reframing. Just the sound of realization settling in where control had been. So what do I do now? He asked. You have your stuff. That's it? Yes. You're just going to block me now. Yes. Another pause. Then, wow. No anger in it. No sarcasm. Just realization. I guess this isn't a test anymore, he said. No, I replied. It's not. I ended the call, looked at the screen for 1 second, then opened the chat and blocked him. Not for a day. Not for a week. Not for a month. For good. The silence after that felt nothing like the silences he used to give me. It didn't press against me. It didn't echo. It didn't ask for anything. It was clean. Stable. Mine. I set my phone down and didn't pick it up again for a long time. Not because I was forcing myself not to, because I didn't need to. That urge to check, refresh, reread, anticipate, it was gone. I got up, walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood there looking out the window at the city moving exactly the way it always had, untouched by the fact that something in my life had just ended. That was the strange part. Nothing outside changed. No dramatic marker. No grand collapse. Just an internal line I had finally stopped crossing for someone else. I went to bed that night without replaying the conversation, without wondering if I had been too cold, too harsh, too final. I slept. And for the first time in a long time, there was no interruption. The next morning, my alarm went off like it always did. I turned it off, sat up, and realized something small. I wasn't bracing myself for anything. No aftermath. No dread. Just morning. I made coffee, opened the window, let the air move through the apartment that was fully mine again. Days passed. Then weeks. Nothing dramatic happened. That was the point. Life didn't become louder. It became steadier. I went to work, met friends, made plans without calculating how they would be received, answered messages without second-guessing tone or timing, laughed without checking my phone in between. And slowly, I started noticing something I hadn't felt in a long time. Trust. Not in someone else. In myself. In my reactions. In my boundaries. In the fact that if something felt wrong, I didn't need to wait for proof dramatic enough to justify leaving. About 3 months later, I heard his name again. Not from him. From a mutual friend. We were sitting across from each other at a cafe, sunlight cutting warm lines across the table. She stirred her drink absently. Hey, this is random, but have you heard anything about Adrian lately? I shook my head. No. She hesitated, then said, I think he's seeing someone. I nodded once. Okay. She studied my face for a reaction that didn't come. There's something else. I looked up. What? She exhaled. I didn't know if I should tell you, but it felt strange not to. Just say it. She leaned in slightly. He did the same thing. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. Blocking, she said. Disappearing. Coming back like nothing happened. Asking if she missed him. I held my cup in both hands. The warmth settled into my palms. And, I asked, it didn't work. I almost smiled. Not out of satisfaction. Out of recognition. Yeah, I said quietly. That makes sense. She left, my friend added. Pretty fast. I nodded again. Of course she did. Because once you really see it, you can't unsee it. We sat there for a moment in easy silence. No tension. No weight. Just a conversation that didn't require me to defend anything, explain anything, or carry anything that wasn't mine. Later that evening, I walked back into my apartment, set down my keys, and looked around. Everything was exactly where I had left it. Nothing out of place. Nothing waiting. Nothing unresolved. And that was when the final truth settled in. If someone has to disappear to be appreciated, then they were never building something real in the first place. Because real things don't need absence to prove they exist. They stay. They hold. They don't test you just to see if you'll break. I turned off the lights, walked into my bedroom, and closed the door on a life that had once taught me to wait for someone to come back.